introduce you to Stuart Church.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak. It's actually the first Christian meeting I've been to, so it's a bit of a baptism of fire, really. What I'm talking about tonight is user experience on a shoestring. And those of you of a certain age may recognise that program when you're actually looking around. Shoestring was a detective from many years ago. So I'll give you a little bit of background about me. This is kind of in stark contrast to the talk about Java 8, kind of the two ends of the spectrum here. So I've been doing UX for Usability UX, wasn't even called UX when I started. Usability for more than a decade now. I've been mostly working for myself in that time. I spent a couple of years working for an e-learning company as an information architect. And I've worked on a pretty diverse array of projects really, ranging from kind of higher education to e-commerce to intranet to mobile, and that involves kind of strategic work and user experience and user research and prototyping and coding in some cases. So I've kind of a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to UX really, but I hope in the process of having quite a breadth of background and knowledge, that gives me some ability to kind of cut across things and see some of the consistencies that emerge. I'm also involved in running the Bristol Usability Group and the UX Bristol Conference. So if any of you are interested in UX, then please feel free to sign up to the group and come to some of our meetings, which we hold in the watershed every now and again. And in the summer we have the UX Bristol Conference at the M-Shed, which is coming up in July this year. So, user experience on a shoestring. I think I should probably explain the title a little bit more. So, on a shoestring kind of almost implies you can do it for absolutely no cost whatsoever. And I think what I'm getting at is however fancy your shoes are, there's a kind of cheaper way of doing it. You may have very, very shiny shoes, in which case your shoestrings will be much more expensive. But essentially the idea is about, in terms of creating great user experiences, there are tools and methods and techniques that we use. And sometimes those tools and methods and techniques may not give us as much value as we'd like in terms of contributing to the overall experience that we're creating for users at the end. So the aim of this talk is to really try to understand some of the ways in which we can get the most bang for our buck in terms of what we do with user experience. And I'll just have a show of hands to see who anybody here would consider themselves designers or UXers in any way, shape or form whatsoever. One. Really?
He's a Java developer.
So how many of you have kind of some input into design decisions, would you say, as from coding, as you're presumably the rest of you are developers and techies in some way?
Actual software.
In terms of affecting the front end of what people see, so there's still half of you maybe? So you're making design decisions in some way anyway, if you don't necessarily consider yourself UXers, which I think is an important point because we've got this fancy job title of the user experience, which is all very grandiose, but in terms of what appears on the screen and how it functions is actually the responsibility of everybody who contributes to that product. Everybody owns the experience. Maybe a UX person kind of orchestrates that to a degree, but ultimately everyone is responsible for that thing that appears on the screen. So in terms of creating a good user experience, this is kind of a standard user-centered design lifecycle, which is pretty much what myself and most other UXers base their work on, which is a kind of iterative model whereby the core things are understanding the organisation, so the business goals, what is this thing that you're building, why are you building it, what is success to you, what's your vision for how this is going to change the world, that sort of thing. So that kind of business side of things. It's understanding the user, who's the person who's going to be using it, what are their goals, their attitudes, their behaviours, what they're doing, how does this thing fit into their life and how are you going to make their life better or how are you going to extract more money depending on your motives from them. And then based on that kind of research and insight that you have, build something that you think will meet their needs. So that could be in the first instance quite a rough prototype or a sketch, and ultimately it's going to be something like a beta site and the real site. And then to know if it's any good, you have to evaluate it, you have to test it, and then keep going around that kind of process. And in terms of doing all that, there are various tools and techniques that we have. So in terms of understanding users, we do contextual research, ethnography, and interviews and surveys and so on, competitive analysis. You might develop a set of personas. You might then produce sketches or have a complex interactive prototype or set of wireframes. And then you might do some user testing. And all of these things are kind of time consuming, and with user experience work, there seems to be a lot of focus on deliverables that you produce. It seems to be a deliverables driven business, which is something that I take issue with. I think a lot of deliverables we produce aren't necessarily that much value in terms of contributing to the way that things actually get built. So, and we can think about places where value isn't there. So I've worked on projects where I've done some user testing, kind of standard round user testing, recruit users, take them through tasks on the site, write nice fancy schmancy, big fat report, everyone's happy. Then you find out the client has actually no way at all of implementing those changes. And that to me is a huge waste of money. They would have been better off halving the budget, doing some lighter testing, and being able to make some positive change and actually move the thing that people are going to be using on and improve it. The whole idea of massive documents. We've seen when your heart sinks slightly when somebody thuds a massive kind of requirements document on your desk, that sort of thing. And also, I think user-centered design falls down a bit on this whole approach. Often in the kind of agency environment, when it almost becomes commoditized. You say, hey, you've got this many days, we'll do a survey, we'll produce some personas, we'll produce some detailed wireframes, and then we'll do some testing. And it's almost like a thoughtless process of these are the boxes we do, and that will ensure that we produce a great experience. And while all those things are of value and can be of value, the core of user experience is problem solving and trying to work out what the issues are. So if you're constraining your boxes, it doesn't necessarily help you do that. And obviously there are good reasons, and there's project management reasons for doing this. But it's almost like a one-size-fits-all approach to UX, which I think that there can be a lot of wastage in that, and a lot of things where you have to jump through hoops because that's what the Gantt chart says, and that's what you must do. And I've even been in a position where I worked on a project where it was specified that we would produce 4 personas as part of the work, and we did some user research, and from that emerged the fact that there were 3 key personas, and the client said, no, you said you were going to produce 4 personas, we want another persona, so we had to make up a persona and ignore it to keep the client happy and tick that box. And that's insane, that really is, that doesn't serve anyone well apart from a project manager who kind of has done their job.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question? What is a persona?
Oh, sorry. I didn't ask anything about Java in the last one. Okay, so a persona is a kind of a profile of a user. So you might say interview or do surveys on your potential audience, and then you'll segment them in some way and say, well, we've got these kind of new people who don't understand the system, and these are their attributes, and you give them a name. This might be Dave the new person, and what they're thinking and feeling, and what they'd like to know. And then you've got Colin, the tried and tested old customer who knows everything inside out, and that's what he wants, and he wants to get to this quickly, and so on. So it's a way of kind of encapsulating the user research into a very human form. So rather than produce a big research report with kind of bullet points of things, and say, well, this is this person, this is a kind of a summary, an archetype of the person we're designing for. So sorry.
Yeah.
If there is anything as I go through, then please ask me to explain.
Age group as well.
Sorry?
Is it the age group of the classes?
It depends. I mean, what you try to do is not segment according to normal demographics. It's about behavioural segments, because you're designing for the root of good design is supporting people's behaviour. Now, it might be that a particular group is better represented by a certain age group, but I would say that I don't think I've ever actually produced a persona which is defined by the age group. So you have to give them a face and a photo, and that kind of almost comes out of people you've encountered and experienced, and one sort of feels right to do. So can be a bit woolly in that sense in terms of how you choose to communicate it, but the findings are kind of hopefully pretty robust from the research that you've done. So in agencies there's this tendency to kind of commoditise rather than treat it as a problem-solving exercise. So sometimes you wouldn't even necessarily start with research. You might start with actually saying, well, I've got an idea, let's get that out there and do some testing or test the validity of this particular approach. So what I'm going to do is kind of step through just a few ways of coming at this problem and thinking about what factors contribute to getting to better design faster and more efficiently. So the inspiration for this, I'm very pleased with this, I should tell you, there are three kind of main areas which I think influence the way that I think about doing user experience, which are kind of lean startup type approach, agile, and kind of guerrilla testing, and that has the handy acronym of LAGER. So what more could you want? So lean startup, for those of you who don't know about it, is something that's come into prominence in the last few years, which is rather than having a kind of a fixed business plan for a business, you say, well, this is what we're going to do, and you kind of blindly go on and develop this thing. It's about taking a more experimental approach to finding out what works in business. So you have a kind of improvement cycle. So in the same way that we have the user-centered design thing, you kind of understand, build something, test it. That's at the heart of the startup kind of approach, which is the build, measure, learn cycle. So you don't necessarily know what's going to work. So you try something, or minimum viable product, which you probably come across, test the validity of that. If it tests well, you follow it on. If it doesn't, you kind of go off, try a different approach. So you, rather than having something massive, saying we're going to build this and in 2 years' time we'll have product X, when assumptions change, the world changes in that time, you're starting small and saying, we'll try this to validate this general approach and build on that, and it gives you the ability to evolve as things change and meet new challenges as well. So that kind of lean startup, which now there's a whole branch of UX which is lean UX, which is very much about taking a kind of experimental approach. Kind of agile, which is kind of closely related to that, obviously from more the software development point of view in terms of sprints and so on. And guerrilla testing. Often when people think about user testing, it feels like this big thing that you have to do. It's going to be a big effort, it's going to cost, you're going to have to get these people in and have this big report and so on. But there are lighter weight methods that we can adopt to answer questions that we may have and get valuable insights that can inform designs in quite a simple way. And so this is kind of, it's a kind of more of a strategic thing, the first one. There's a guy in the States who's kind of one of the sort of leading people in user experience in the world, Jared Spall. And he's great because he's, rather than kind of keeping all his ideas close to his chest, he kind of gets out there and tells people about them. And he's always been interested in what sorts of companies produce really good designs and experiences. And one of the things that he's concluded is that one of the most powerful predictors of how well a company will do is about having a shared vision for what you're trying to achieve. So, people can debate the benefits of particular processes. Everyone says, oh well, you don't do waterfall anymore, you don't want to do agile this way, or this particular flavour of it, and everyone's got their personal preference for a process, and for some, in some cases, some processes may be better than others. But when you cut across it all, the thing that tends to lead to success more than others is having a shared vision. That is, everyone understands what it is they're trying to build, the core of that thing, where they're going to be in the future, and where they currently are in that process, and that's understood by everybody. So you're working towards a common goal, and just having that shared understanding is just incredibly powerful. It's something when you're defining where you're ending up, And a lot of the time in projects I've worked on, there isn't that sense. It's kind of, obviously we've worked on projects with feature creep and people changing their mind. We have this and that, and you don't quite know what's happening. And they are the projects which don't work as well. The ones where you know why this project exists, who it's meeting the needs of, and why it's competitive against others in the marketplace. Those sorts of things are really, really powerful and shouldn't be underestimated.
So that complexity with previous slide where you're talking about agile and
No, because there's two levels. I think one is the build. So there's having a vision. I mean, that vision could be set fairly soon in the future. It could be in 6 months is your vision. That's your broad vision. But also, if you're taking that lean approach, it means that vision can change. Nothing is cast in stone. And if that vision changes, and you say, well, okay, that's not working, but by our research we found out that this is actually something that people are interested in. You can redefine the way you want your vision to be. So it's kind of, I think you always have to be aiming towards something. I mean, you could treat it purely as a kind of a blind evolutionary type of approach where you're just kind of responding to things and to see where you end up. I think you have to have some sort of horizon that you're aiming for. And that's the whole point of iterating, that you can, any part of that whole process you can change as your knowledge and understanding of the process goes on. Okay, the next one is avoiding unnecessary research. So if you're going to do user research, and if you are designing, doing user experience, you're designing something which people are going to use, you should at some point do some user research. There's a danger sometimes that, it goes down to this kind of commoditization type thing, that people just gather data without really understanding what they're going to do with it. And I think that's kind of the acid test, is that for any bit of data that you collect, anything you decide to do, you've got to understand why you're collecting that, and when you've got that data in that form, what you're going to do with it. I mean, I've gone through lots of surveys in the past where people collect loads of detailed demographic data, and I don't think I've ever actually actioned anything based on, well, most people who use this site are aged between 35 and 44. There's not much you can really do with that. But if it's about saying, well, these people tend to be, tend to be very cautious in terms of their buying power or something, or these people like to see detail, then these are actionable things where you can say, okay, given that understanding, we can now implement something that will meet that need. So it's that kind of almost, as you do any research, go through and check and say, why am I doing this? How am I going to get that data in the best possible way? And then what will I do with that in terms of making a recommendation or producing a design schedule or whatever. So it's about actionable design. The other thing, which is kind of, it seems like a fairly dull thing compared to kind of having massive strategies and great worldviews. But if you're doing user-centered design and you want to create user experience, you need access to users. And in a lot of places that don't have kind of user testing embedded within them, it's this idea of, it's a big barrier. Well, we need to get people and we don't really know how and so on. So if you actually treat it as a kind of a bit of a trickle process, and you start saying, well, we'll set up a SurveyMonkey survey or something, just to collect details from people, get them to opt in. You can have that on email footers, you can have a link on your website. When testing is coming up, you can maybe put it out on social media somewhere. But you just kind of, it's just there, it's sitting there, people will sign up, you'll have a pool of users that you can dip into. They're there to access when you need them. That in itself creates value because it's taking out a barrier. And the last thing you want in designing good stuff is actually a barrier to getting users in. So that's a pretty low cost thing. It just takes a decision to do this. It needs to be somebody's job once in a while, just to check it and keep it ticking over. But actually having those users there, you can just log into SurveyMonkey and see a list of people who have volunteered to take part in stuff. It's really, really useful. This is something which comes from lean startup. So one of the kind of messages of that is get out of the building. The idea that you go and meet people who are using your products and services, and you won't understand how well it's going to be received or understood until you actually do that. And from a UX point of view, that's just doing testing or user research in some way. Now that could be kind of quite detailed, research, quite a hefty bit of research, but there are shortcuts to doing it. One of them is to kind of go where the wild things are, where your users are, and kind of see the users in their natural habitat, if you like. So you can do things like coffee shop testing. I was doing a project recently on how university students access library resources. So I went to universities and said, can I go into your libraries? And went to most libraries in universities have got coffee shops attached to them. Kind of sat in a coffee shop, bribe students buying them a coffee and a cake to sit down for 15 or 20 minutes and go through some scenarios, ask them some questions. That required no, apart from getting permission to do it, that required no setup. It didn't require a big test plan or it just required me to have a general idea of the sorts of things I wanted to ask. It was quite ad hoc and quite sort of guerrilla methods, but you can get really, really useful feedback quite quickly and easily by doing it with minimum effort. The other thing is kind of getting shortcuts to user information as well. In some cases, there may be people who are called here information gatekeepers, people who may have an intimate knowledge of what people want as part of their job. So people in call centres are particularly good. They get people phoning up for help, support and so on, talking to them, and you'll get a really good idea about the main issues that people are facing. It's not a complete substitute, so you'll get a filtered view, but it does allow you to have an insight that you wouldn't have had before. If you don't want to get out of the building, stay in the building. So again, a lot of traditional user testing is kind of quite time-consuming and onerous to organise. You have a test facility that all feels very formal, and you might hire a test facility. You might have to work with people who are recruiting users for you and have them scheduled in, so they'll turn up at this test facility every hour through a day for a couple of days or something. And it just feels big. It's a big thing to organise and plan. But now with most people on Skype or Google in some way, you can, if you've got your user panel, you can email people and you can say, we have a quick Skype chat. One of the questions you might ask them, do you use Skype or Google Hangouts or something like that? You can just send them an email saying, I'll send you an Amazon voucher if you can spend half an hour chatting with me. It's easy to arrange a time that's mutually convenient. Screen sharing with Skype, you can, there's research done which shows that the results are qualitatively the same, and the actual insights that you're getting out of face-to-face user testing and remote testing are pretty much identical. But there, you might be doing one thing, it's 10 o'clock, I'm scheduled in to talk to Mrs. Smith then, give her a call, do a user test. It's so much easier. So probably 75% of the testing I do is remote testing now. There's no geographical barriers, you're not worrying about people dropping out because they can't turn up for testing or whatever. So, I think that's definitely the way forwards. You can use quick and dirty metrics. One of the things that when you're designing, is you want to measure how well you're doing. So you can get that out of doing usability testing, which will give you more of a qualitative insight. But to track metrics over time is usually quite a good idea. And there are a couple of metrics which I think are really useful. One is the system usability scale, which is a 10-point Likert scale type of thing, which is quite old school. I don't know if you can read that, but it's kind of, I like to use the system frequently, strongly disagree to agree, I found it unnecessarily complex, it's easy to use. And you put those together and get a score out of 100. And you can either do this as a kind of a survey or as something at the end of a user test, either face-to-face or remotely, just to create a metric. And what you can then do It's kind of track that over time. So this is for a client. Go from their old site. So this is a score out of 100. It pretty much works out sort of like degree scores. So getting 40% is kind of like a third or something like that, or getting close to fail. Then they had redesigned it based on some of the kind of testing stuff they did. Produced a beta site, which with the sustain went up to nearly 80, which is obviously a massive improvement. And then when they launched it, it kind of dropped back a bit because obviously the beta site can kind of cut through a lot of the it's new, it's novel, it's a bit shiny, and then when the realities of migrating the whole site into and then people have used it for a while, once that kicks in, then there's a little bit more kind of cynicism. But that is a really useful thing to have when you're designing stuff, to be tracking your progress rather than relying on qualitative insights, to actually have something tracking your performance.
So you weren't disappointed between the beta site and then the new site?
No, I think it makes perfect sense. I think you'd expect, because almost because the old site was so crap.
Yeah, but it's still an improvement.
Yeah, still a massive improvement where it was. And if you get in between sort of 60 and 80, you do it right anyway. But people were kind of blown away. Oh, this is so much better than it was. And then obviously the reality, that's seeing it for the first time. And the reality is that once they use it in their day-to-day work, and there's still going to be some issues involved in it.
So, were there the same users between each of those three columns?
No, they're a completely different set.
So, like often with betas, you'll get early adopters or people that are excited about new things.
Yeah.
And then in the final column, is that then all of the people that like an old one and they're forced onto the new one? Or
No, they were both recruited in the same way.
So, okay.
Yeah, so it's from a pool of people.
Right.
So we had a user panel that we were dipping into a recruit. So that we had there's no reason why that first group would be any more kind of committed or anything than the second group. There's also going to be a bit of sampling error there, but it seems quite robust.
So the new people didn't know about the old site?
The new people didn't know about it. Yeah, they'd had used it. They're all kind of, established users of the site. So they're excited about the new site to start with on the first glance. But when they'd used it for their specific purpose, that shows one of the limitations of a single random testing as well. That it's a bit artificial. So you can get you always get useful insights, but in order for a bit this to an artificial situation, you probably need to have a few different kind of research methods. If you throw a few guerrilla tests in and things, or just to kind of triangulate your findings. Now this might be controversial. I don't know. It's wireframing. I think wireframes are kind of interactive prototypes of things. So a lot of people use Axure for things like. So do many of you kind of see kind of Axure prototypes and end up building them? Are you familiar with Axure? No?
I've seen wireframes and other things for other tools.
So you might have static wireframes, annotations, or you might have kind of clickable Axure-based prototypes, things like that. Which is the kind of, in a way, the bread and butter of UXers. But increasingly, I think they're not that great in terms of the value they provide. Because the tools you use, you tend to spend a lot of time producing them, and there becomes more and more emphasis on making them look really shiny, which is not really, it's not really a design issue here. You're actually just trying to communicate the functionality. And it feels that, especially now that for web-based stuff particularly, the medium is changing and you've got much more fluid kind of responsive designs and transitions, and everything is much more fluid. Moving away from a static page model to kind of much more of a kind of car-based fluid transitional kind of model. Then it just feels like the wrong medium to be designing in anyway. It feels like a lot of effort to produce something which is then potentially open to a lot of misinterpretation once it gets a shiny kind of paint and actually being implemented. So in my work, and I see this in other people I know, is that I've tended to start mainly working at the level of just sketching ideas out, and then working with developers and designers, which might be two different people, or it might be one person if you're lucky, to say this is how I think it's going to work, and kind of storyboarding, sort of transitions and things, and sketching out the concept, and then getting it into code as soon as possible. So moving towards HTML prototypes to the thing, so you're not really throwing away anything at any point in that process. The trouble with producing wireframes is now I think that they take a lot of time to produce. You always have to throw them away, and they don't necessarily capture the kind of subtleties of behaviours that you see in a lot of apps and websites that are out there. So that to me is a the last couple of projects I've worked on, I've done this. It felt like a big time saving to me. The progress has been made much more quickly. This is a bit of an old school one. Does anyone know who that is?
Jacob Nielsen?
So Jacob Nielsen is kind of, he's the person who really made usability kind of mainstream, I guess. And he's you don't actually hear that much from him these days. He's not as kind of vociferous as he once was. And he's a bit of a figure of fun because he's very, very functional and utilitarian in terms of his approach. He's a bit else. But what he did come up with was kind of a set of usability heuristics, kind of rules of thumb, some things that you should know when you're designing. These are things that can be applied to any device, whether it's a microwave or a website or whatever. And they're things like visibility of system status, speak the user's language, recognition rather than recall. Things which are kind of rooted in the psychology of people using it, but kind of general rules for making stuff so that it's easy to understand. And there's some interesting studies by a colleague of Jacob Nielsen's called Rolf Mundlich, called the Comparative Usability Evaluation. And what he did, he got a whole load of teams of usability professionals to evaluate particular interfaces and kind of compare their results. Now, what was interesting wasn't so much, or his conclusions, was not so much the differences between the teams, but the fact that the vast majority of errors that were found could all have been avoided by understanding kind of basic heuristics, basic rules of thumb about how you design stuff. So in terms of creating value and designing the right thing the first time, understanding these sorts of heuristics and basic design principles is just a really, really powerful thing to do. And I have a suspicion that at the moment, because there's, especially with mobile and things becoming much more minimalist, you can't really have easy affordances in the same way. There's, the space is limited, so you end up becoming much more iconic, and some of the gestures and things that you have to do on mobile tablets are kind of slightly opaque and have to be learnt. I think a lot of the original kind of design heuristics are being lost a bit. So I think that's a good thing to know. So you can break those rules. A lot of mobile stuff is successfully breaking the rules, but it's good to know the rules in the first place so that you know that you're breaking them. Doing lightweight testing. So you can do your face-to-face user testing, recruit people, spend an hour with each of them. And there are quite a few online tools now which let you do testing in a much more lightweight way. A couple that I use are Verify app and Loop 11. So Verify is good for tying in with things like this kind of idea of hypothesis testing and being experimental. In that, I don't know how much of an internet connection I've got. It lets you create very simple tests from screenshots. So it's not about testing tasks, it's about conceptual understanding of screenshots. You can create these tests based on preferences, which designs that people prefer. A click test, so you can ask where would you click if you were going to do whatever, and you can record where clicks are going. You can ask people what they remember, so present them with a screenshot for about 5 seconds and say what do you remember about it, which is interesting because it gives you a sense of where people's attention is being directed to. Things like, label tests, what would you label this as, leave something blank, or ask people to rename something, and get people to annotate your designs, have a mood test, is it smiley face or sad face, So it's essentially, it allows you to ask very specific questions of elements of your designs in a really sort of quick and dirty way. Upload a screenshot, ask a question, send a URL, and you can get some feedback on that. So rather than, we've all been in situations where we're sitting around saying, well, it should be this way, and somebody else in the office saying, no, it should be this way. Actually, you can just create one of these, even if you're just sending it out, tweeting it to a few friends or something, if they're, these will be a decent approximation of your audience and get some data. So while it might not be the most robust thing ever, you're actually getting some evidence-based decisions on your design rather than doing it purely from the point of view of opinion. So this is something, this is the sort of thing you get in the background there. So it was for an intranet saying, where would you, which bits of information are most important to you, and people clicking on it, just to get a sense of the aim was to prioritise the information on the page to make sure that the hierarchy was right, so you see the most important stuff at the top of the page, and there's sort of a gradient of importance as you go down in terms of it.
So this is just based on images, so you could use it for mobile as well.
Yeah, they do.
I'm thinking, there's a lot of tools which do like eye tracking and see where people are looking.
Yeah.
But it seems that doesn't really exist for mobile because the screen is very limited. They can't really.
I don't think there's any eye tracking for mobile yet. Although you can kind of emulate mobile on the desktop would still.
Yeah, I mean, you have the front-facing cameras, but the problem is the screen is very small, so you can't really identify where exactly they're looking and see if they're looking up the screen.
Yeah. And also, I would say, if we're talking about...
Only do it when you're
Yeah, I was also saying that eye tracking is, if we're talking about value, then I say that eye tracking is one of the least valuable methods for researching people, because you can never be, you can see where an eye is in theory pointing at, but whether that information is going in, and peripheral vision is also very important. So you never quite know, to find out the effect of that, you have to measure a behavioural outcome, which you can do anyway without eye tracking. If you do an A/B test or something, you can actually tease that apart without expecting
it just mean that
so
you don't have to ask users to tell you where they're looking, but you can just know.
Yeah, because it's all about behavioural outputs and what you do rather than, as you become more experienced, you might so muscle memory becomes more important as you get more experience, so you wouldn't actually be, as hard as something. And loop together is something which allows you to do tasks and kind of frames your browser with a task. Asks you to do something, and when you've done it, you can say, yes, I've done it. And it will be recording the pages you're going to until you get kind of a task completion rate that moves through it, and people can then report on how they've done it. So that's remote, unmoderated testing. But if you have a product which has a very clear kind of transactional process you want to test and see how well people can do that, that's brilliant for doing that in large numbers quite quickly. Getting there. Goes through this because I'm aware the pizza's coming, and I don't stand a chance once they get it right. Designing the right thing, one of the most valuable things you can do is not build things that people aren't going to use, and that basically goes back to the whole kind of lean startup type approach. Be experimental, have hypotheses, test them, and build on that knowledge and evolve. So things like A/B testing are really good for this approach. Build less. There's a nice concept which came from the guys at 37 Signals who made Basecamp, which is epicenter design. So you can think of a product in terms of lots of features, but what's at the epicenter? What is the thing at the heart of that product? If you stripped away everything and kind of prioritised, what would be the thing that would be left right at the core of it? And that's a really important thing to know for whatever you're building. What is the epicenter? Because that allows you to kind of protect that. And one thing with 37 Signals did was, they were for Basecamp, they were getting lots of requests for things like, much more formal project management processes and Gantt charts and all this. And they knew that epicenter wasn't about that. It was about communication. It was about sharing the communication, and they protected that despite their users wanting other things, because it's successful in a different way. And also, different design philosophy, mobile first, thinking about constraints, forces you to think about the essence and the heart of what you're trying to do. So essentially, they're kind of pretty much the same sort of thing. What's at the heart?
Why mobile first?
Because mobile first of all, for lots of on the web, you're going to be designing for mobile anyway. But it's a way of prioritising. So if you design for mobile first, you reach that epicenter. You say, well, if you strip everything out, what is the thing that we're doing? Where is the value in this app? Because you haven't got much space to show it. So whereas on a website, on the homepage, you've got this real estate, there's so much temptation in the organisations, you get everybody fighting for their little space on the homepage. You can't do that on mobile, and you have to say, we shouldn't do it anyway.
So if it's a good website though, it looks good on everything. So that's basically like saying don't clutter it up if it's on a big screen. I mean,
yeah, but you can see that in the way the design has gone. That whole mobile first philosophy has meant that if you say something like if this then that, it's just massive on a big screen, and it's pretty much like a mobile scaled up.
So mobile first is basically by saying by accident we happen to have made people do clean websites.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, but it's like.
Well, it forces borrowing. I mean, the trouble with a lot of design is that everybody wants their share of it, and there's too many features that nobody can prioritise.
But I don't want a special website just for mobile. I want a website that's clean on the desktop and the mobile.
Yeah, exactly. And with responsive stuff, you can do more on a desktop view, but that the essence of it is this thing, this find function, this find stuff in whatever. But it boils down to understanding the epicenter of what you're trying to do. Midwest documentation. I spent 5 days writing a research report a couple of weeks ago. It just killed me, and there was no reason for it except for the fact that the client wanted it. Usually it's about actionable research, a couple of sides of A4, and probably half hour, an hour meeting with the people who are going to be dealing with that report, rather than spending a day or two writing up something that's massive. It's crazy the amount of time that gets wasted on need to do shiny reports, where you're just wasting time on shiny things rather than useful things. And collaboration, the follow-on from you have less documentation, it forces you to collaborate more. And obviously in Agile, that's what Scrums are for. That kind of everyone knows what everybody else is doing. It's part of that developing that vision. Scrum does that in that small way of kind of Kanban charts and Scrum and things. It's about this is where we are. It's all about communication. And if you don't have all that information, you can't make good, from a UX point of view, you can't make good design decisions. There's a project I was working on fairly recently where the client would be kind of drip feeding information, so you never had that kind of big understanding of the vision. And that's it. Anybody got any questions? Just a time, I think so.
So for those websites that I hadn't heard of before, the Verify app and the other one, so they look good. For me, as someone that runs a website, how do I get my users to use that? So do they have an ecosystem of people willing to try it, or do I have to get...
Both. They have kind of people who, you can have a public test, and they have people that they'll send there to do it. The best, it depends on your site, really. I mean, how specialist it is or not. So if it's a fairly public-facing site, social media is pretty good for just sending out a URL, saying, because they literally are, 2 or 3 million tests. You can string together longer ones, but they really are quick and dirty.
So it's just up to me to motivate users to complete the thing I want.
Yeah, you send that URL.
No, but I mean, as in how I reward them, give them a voucher or something, or do you pay that website?
You could do. For something that small, usually, there's always a slight issue with incentives. To do full-on research, take an hour of somebody's time, or get them to complete a big survey or something, you need to have some either price incentive or, give them, user testing is usually 40 or 50 quid or something.
Yeah.
For something like that, I think they're actually quite fun, different. You can probably, it depends on how engaged your audience is as well. So I think there's always a kind of if you think you've got an engaged audience, just say help us out takes 2 minutes, and you'll probably get a reasonable number of people answering it. And then if you don't get much response, kind of ratchet it up a bit and offer a prize or something like that. Okay. Does somebody smell the waffle? Did not appear yet.
Need to go to it. Go and get the pizza. In a second.
Okay, so yeah.
Thank you.